Well, welcome everyone to Housing Smart Communities Initiative webinar. Again, thanks for being here on this Monday evening. My name is Kylord Farmer. I am a senior planner with the Ulster County Planning Department, and I'm joined with some of my colleagues. How many people are in here? Wonder if it makes sense to, well, maybe we'll do introductions after the presentation. But I'm joined by Dennis Doyle. If you want to introduce yourself. You're on mute.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis Doyle. I'm the planning director for Ulster County. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully you will go through a fairly brief presentation and get some questions with respect to this. This is a brand new initiative for the county, and we're really pleased the way it's come out, and we hope that we're successful in getting communities and others to join.
And then Kate and Eric.
Hi, I'm Kate Straker. I'm a research planner with Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. We were the consultant that did the county's housing action plan and then worked to develop this Housing Smart Communities initiative.
Hi, everyone. Eric Pearson here, also with Pattern for Progress. Thanks for joining tonight.
Okay, I think let's get into the presentation so we can work through it and then have a discussion afterwards. So again, as Dennis mentioned, we're launching the Ulster County Housing Smart Communities Initiative. This is a brand new initiative for the county. We launched a couple weeks ago now, and this is really an opportunity to learn more about the program. We've got a program website, you can learn all about it, but figured we'd do this in person or face-to-face with folks. So let us get started. So what is the Housing Smart Communities Initiative? It's essentially a certification and capacity building program that provides resources, guidance, technical support, and incentives for Ulster County communities that are working to address their housing crisis or our housing crisis and working on housing policy. How does it work? So municipalities receive a Housing Smart Community certification after they've completed a certain set of weighted, what we're calling housing smart actions, which are essentially different ways and strategies to preserve and develop workforce and affordable housing in their communities. As I mentioned, there's incentives once you join the program. It's mostly a carrot-based program. We provide these resources and try to help build your capacity to do this work. And then we've got a program website that can be used for the communities and the general public as kind of like a central hub. Dennis, do you want to take this one?
Sure, thanks, Kai. The Housing Smart Communities Initiative grew out of the Ulster County Housing Action Plan, which was completed in 2021. It contained a series of recommendations. One of the key components was essentially to try to find a way to increase the production of housing by removing some of the barriers to housing that exist at a community level. And so there are other recommendations in there are a housing trust fund. There are also recommendations in that housing action plan relative to the need for supportive housing, which the county is moving to do through some of its other programs and using what they call American Recovery Funds or ARP funds as well. And the idea of a housing smart communities is modeled after, many of you may be aware that the Department of Environmental Conservation runs a program called Climate Smart Communities, which has various ways that you can become a climate smart community and move through the various levels of being a climate smart community. And we thought that that was a great model to essentially take a look at the things that the housing smart community could do. And it's designed to essentially be looked at from a bottom-up approach, what you can do at a municipal level with assistance from the county as you move forward. Thanks, Kai. So one of the things that we want to recognize is none of these programs that come together as that are complicated and complex and requiring various inputs are successful unless you have a very engaged and committed advisory committee. And we were very fortunate, I think, both on the housing action plan and then moving into the housing smart communities initiative to have an extremely engaged committee that sat with us and reviewed the program, reviewed the findings, and were critical and collaborative in terms of working together, and was very enjoyable. And I think I speak for all of the consultants and staff that were involved. This was a committee that was highly knowledgeable and very enjoyable to work with, and committed to an outcome, I think, that will make it successful.
Excellent. Thanks, Dennis. So we're going to jump into what the Housing Smart actions are in a moment, but I think it's important to set some context of how we got here, which informs how we're trying to solve the problem through those policy actions. So the first is that we know that over the past 10, 20, or even more years, there's been increasing demand for housing for folks who want to live here in the county. We kind of saw this big first wave in the post 9/11 era, and then that was kind of repeated again during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we know that there's this trend for homes as well as second homes here in the county. But on the reverse side of that, there has been limited new housing supply being built in the county, specifically a lack of affordable workforce and middle income housing. We are building new housing, but it's a mismatch from what residents in the community can afford.
So, and you may say, well, why is there increased demand for housing when our population has not increased that significantly? And the short answer is that there are a number of factors that influence that. One of them that I think doesn't get talked about not much is the change in family size. So family size has decreased dramatically, and when you look at family size moving from around 3.5 persons to family to around a little less than 2.5 people for family, it makes your housing stock work that much harder in order to house a family. It also changes, quite frankly, in many instances, the type of housing that's needed in terms of larger housing with 3 or 4 bedrooms versus rental housing that is needed as well. And Kai mentioned that, and one of the things that I think that we're aware of is what is getting built is at the high end or at the very low end. Subsidized housing. So we have something we call the missing middle that doesn't seem to be getting built. That essentially is the starter homes that you see for families that are just starting out in the housing market. Thanks, Kai.
Just a couple others. We know that construction costs have been going up even before the pandemic, but certainly during it, we saw things like construction demand go up, inflation, pandemic-related restrictions, supply chain issues, and then labor shortages, all increasing the construction costs for new homes upwards of around $300 to $350 per square foot, and that's higher than it's ever been in the county. And then at the same time, we know things like short-term rentals and vacation homes are also taking part of the existing rental and housing stock in general. So the large majority of short-term rentals in our county are whole homes. So those are whole homes that are being taken out of the rental stock and put into the short-term rental stock as well. Dennis, anything to add?
And the current number in the county is from the county uses a consulting firm to essentially track short-term rentals by downloading and grabbing information off the internet and confirming that the unit is actually being used for short-term rentals. The current number in the county is over 2,500 short-term rentals operations in the county right now.
And we have some communities where over 10% of their housing stock is now being used for short-term rentals. So we know those are issues as well. And then finally, we know in some cases there is limited community support for new housing to be developed, specifically workforce and affordable housing. There's a lot of pushback or misunderstanding of the intentions or what the project would be in the community, and so that is a barrier to the development of new housing. And then there's also uncertainty from the developer side as well. The development review process can be confusing and delayed, take several years to get anything built, especially low income and workforce housing. And so that uncertainty costs time and money, which further prevents the development of new housing.
I think the easiest thing to say is absent a broad understanding of the depth and width of a housing crisis, it's much easier to support conserving land than essentially building something on it.
Agreed. Dennis, you want to take this one?
Sure. I'll just do the first two and you can do the
Sure.
second two. How's that?
Yep.
So one of the things why does housing matter? And there are some myths and facts in here. But clearly one of the things that we're really concerned about is that housing costs and availability in line with income allows businesses to meet their workforce and to basically to attract workers and also to retain them. And what we're having right now is unemployment rates in the county are near historic lows. And it's difficult for middle management and some of the tourism economy to attract workers. And you're seeing help wanted signs throughout the county with respect to that. And that's not unusual. I mean, it's currently happening nationwide, but it's particularly acute in Ulster County. The other area that we wanted to talk about is that housing is literally one of the first things that people look to with respect to mental health and having a healthy community. And that is housing stabilities for low and moderate income creates better social and education outcomes for children. If we know the number of people that are actually what they call couch surfing, you can understand some of the difficulties associated with not having a permanent residence.
So just a couple others here, and we're highlighting why housing matters, outside of the altruistic motivations of supporting and housing our community members. There are all these kind of co-benefits that we also need to consider as well that have ripple effects on our economy. So when we can house individuals in our community, it also saves us money on healthcare costs, mental health care costs, and then other community costs, emergency services associated with the unhoused population in our community. So that's another kind of co-benefit. And then importantly, we know that when we have a housing stock that can house a wide diversity of our community, that makes a stronger and more resilient community. So we know that diversity is built on a foundation of equity for housing, and that's a diversity of class, race, gender, and abilities. And when we have those things, it creates creativity and innovation in our communities. So a couple key facts before we get into experiencing it. But over the past 10 years, there's been about a 40% increase in the average rent for a 1-2 bedroom house, which essentially means at the same time, wages are stagnant or declining. And so a larger percent of people's income is going towards housing as a cost. So these numbers are a couple years old at this point, but approximately 12% of owners and 29% of renters in the county are spending half of their monthly income or more on housing each month.
And just so everyone understands the what you're shooting for with respect to affordability is around 30% of your income to be spent for housing if you're a renter, and banks will fund you for mortgages up to around 33% of your income.
We've also seen a spike in the home sale price, so 48% increase in the past 8 years. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, a pretty big spike as well. So jumping around $100,000 over a 2-year period. And as we mentioned, we are building new housing, but it is the wrong type of housing. There's a mismatch between what we need and what the housing is getting built. So from 2015 to 2020, the average new home size was 2,245 square feet with a median sale price of $425,000, which is much bigger and outside the price range than the average household size in our county. So what is the program process and what are the benefits of joining? So it's really easy to join. All a municipality has to do is pass a resolution. And we had our first community, the Village of New Paltz, join a couple weeks ago. And a lot more are very interested in passing resolutions in the next month or so. So that's really the low barrier to entry. Once you pass the resolution, you're part of this program and you're a bronze certified community. And then those benefits and incentives get unlocked. We also would love.
And we do have a sample resolution for you, so you don't even have to write your own.
Yep, very low barrier to entry. The second step is designating a housing smart communities coordinator. So that is essentially a volunteer or municipal staff to essentially serve as a liaison between the county and the municipality and help work through some of the policies and decisions. We'd like the municipality to form or assign a housing task force if one is already created. And that's kind of the decision-making body to decide which policies are right for that community, which ones should be prioritized. And then a community can use the website to submit all of these things, the steps that they've completed, so that we can certify you. So those are kind of the steps, hopefully pretty easy. And I'm here, staff are here to help municipalities work through those things. And once you do join, you get things like technical planning support from the Ulster County Planning Department, templates and planning resources, some model regulations and housing policies. We know that out of the housing action plan process, capacity to do this work was a big barrier. It's not that communities didn't want to do it, it's just they didn't have the time and resources to do it. So we're really trying to step up to provide that capacity. Training and education, will be providing trainings in the future about specific policies and different initiatives so that municipalities can learn more about these things. And then consultant support, we have a request right now out for essentially a bench of consulting support on different issues, community outreach and education and messaging, legal support with regulations, community planning and design, things like that. So once you join, we can provide those consulting services to you to do good housing work. And then last but not least, go ahead.
And just as an aside, I just want to say the county is going to basically implement that process as well. So we'll hold the contracts with the consultant and work through the paperwork so that you don't have to do that work at the local level. And we'll manage the consultant scope of services, and then work with your advisory committee and local elected officials to make sure that what comes out of here can be adopted and move forward at the local level.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, and then last but not least, the acting county executive proposed their budget recently, which included $17 million for housing and green growth. And so hopefully some of those funds can also get used to support local communities in doing better housing work. So I'm going to whip through these, and we can always go back to them if we want more details on them. But essentially right now we have 12 housing smart actions that a community can take. It's kind of a choose your own adventure. You don't have to do any of them except for one, which I will mention. But it's really what is appropriate for your community. And then you can go ahead and start implementing those actions with our support. If a community has already been doing these things that I mentioned here in this list, we want to give you points retroactively for doing it, as long as it meets kind of the minimum criteria that we've set out for each of these actions. But there is a little bit of flexibility there as well, because we really, at the end of the day, want everyone to just be doing good housing policy. So these are kind of the action categories. I won't go through them, but it's essentially the levers and the mechanisms that we have to do good housing policy. So Dennis, jump in here at any point, or Kate or Eric. So the first is once you join, pass a resolution. With our support, do a small or large housing focused community outreach and education campaign. And this is the only required action, mainly because, as we were discussing, one of the barriers is a lack of community support for new workforce and affordable housing. And so by educating not just the general public, but also elected officials and volunteers like the planning board about why it's important to build more workforce and affordable housing and how to do it, there'll be a lot more community support and less barriers when projects do come up.
So this discussion is kind of the same page discussion. It doesn't do us any good, for example, if a community at the elected official level essentially provides a basis for streamlining regulations, and at the planning department level or zoning board of appeals level, that cudgel is not picked up. And we find the ability to move projects through the approval process. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we want to make sure that there's an understanding of those things that we talked about at the beginning of the slideshow that's pervasive in the community, so that we have a discussion about housing. We're not having a discussion about us and them. We're not having a discussion about essentially the types of housing that we're talking about. And we're also not having a discussion that literally basically says that we need more open space, not more housing. We can do both. That's our sense here, is we can do both.
Thanks, Dennis. So I just want to mention also that each of these actions are weighted basically by the amount of effort and the effectiveness of them. And so you'll see points allotted for each of them. So the first is creating a housing action plan, similar to what the county has done, but a lot more focused on the municipality and what the specific needs and strategies are of that municipality. It's a nice place to house all the work that you've already been doing or would like to do in the future. And then it can also create kind of a roadmap and a North Star to where you want to get in terms of affordable housing, how many units you want to build, what rents you want rents to look like in that community. And then over time, you can look at how well you're doing in implementing those things and whether they're really effective in your community. So we are recommending that that all the municipalities do create a housing action plan with our support from consultants. It's a great way to get everyone on the same page, as Dennis mentioned, and create a lot of momentum and support for this type of work.
And I think it's important to note that we don't see housing action plans as a statement of goals and objectives. We see housing action plans of increasing the understanding of the crisis that is in front of a community in terms of its housing needs and its housing affordability, and then providing solutions that are specific. We know a lot about communities now because of our geographic information systems and natural resource inventories. And we can point to, in those communities, to places where housing should be allowed and where density should be allowed. And that's the discussion that we want to see happening within a housing action plan, not just a discussion that says we need to do X, but a discussion of we need to do X and here's the best place to do it.
Thanks, Dennis. The next one is adopting or updating short-term rental regulations to make sure that there's a balance between protecting the long-term housing stock in the community and then also ensuring there's also, we know that tourism is an important part of the economy, so finding that balance. But really making sure that we're protecting the long-term housing stock in communities. As Dennis mentioned, we've got over 2,500 short-term rentals listed currently, with over 90% of those being full homes. Dennis, you want to add anything?
Nope, you're fine.
The next is supporting the development of accessory dwelling units or accessory apartments, granny flats, Just lots of different names for them, but this is essentially working on your zoning code to update them so that accessory dwelling units are allowed in all residential districts, whether they're detached as a separate garage or a new structure or part of a home like a basement that can be converted into an accessory apartment. So in some municipalities, it's allowed by right. So if you have a residential property, you can build an ADU. In some places that are restricted entirely from residential areas. And so we want to make that as easy as possible for folks to build new housing stock.
So the planning department has a long history of supporting accessory dwelling units, going back and quite frankly into the 80s. One of the reasons for that is that it makes your existing housing stock work harder by essentially being able to provide an additional unit with basically very minimal increased land disturbance. In addition, it also is a scattered site approach. So rather than having a quote project to deal with and move through the approval process, you really have multiple areas in the community where accessory dwelling units can essentially add to the housing stock. And if you then look at how that works, if you put restrictions on them, as we're suggesting here, with respect to short-term rentals, then you end up essentially making sure that housing stock is being able to meet some of that missing middle. So we really hope that what we see out of this is a loosening up and an understanding of how important accessory dwelling units can be with respect to adding to a housing stock without essentially significant environmental impacts or a significant geographic impacts as well.
Okay, the next one is adopting existing real property tax laws. So there are a long list of tax exemptions that local municipalities can pass, but we've chosen 4 that are focused on housing. So residential, commercial, urban exemption program, so converting non-residential properties into mixed-use properties, first-time home buyers for newly construction homes, alternative veterans exemptions, and then capital improvements on 1 and 2 family residential properties. So all a municipality has to do here is pass a resolution allowing for these exemptions. A homeowner or a property owner then applies for that exemption, and they get an exemption for a set number of years on their property taxes. So another tool that a community can use to incentivize the production or updates to the existing housing stock. Next one is establishing rent stabilization regulations. So as you can see on the right there, we've had an enormous spike over the pandemic in the cost of housing here in the county. We have seen an increase in the number of evictions in the county. And so to help backstop that, certain communities can create rent stabilization regulations. The city of Kingston is going through that process right now. There are some restrictions, so it only applies to apartment buildings with 6 or more units that were built before 1974. So there's only a couple communities in the county that it really makes sense to even implement this policy, but it is a really effective stopgap for keeping people in their homes and not being evicted.
And you have to have a vacancy rate less than 5% as confirmed by a valid survey. Is that correct?
Yep, that is right. And so again, we are happy to help with jurisdictions with all of these things, but this one as well. The next one is zoning updates, what is sometimes referred to as upzoning. And so that is essentially taking a comprehensive look at your zoning code to allow for a wider variety of housing types across your residential areas in your community. So allowing for multifamily or duplexes, triplexes in single family residential areas. So generally just taking the land that you've dedicated towards residential uses and making it work better for the community. But at the same time, we want to make sure that there is a housing stock that's being built that serves the entire community. So we want you to put in mandatory affordable housing requirements. So that essentially looks like any project that's 6 or more units then has a certain percentage of those units to be qualified for low income residents. So that can vary
Yeah, this
depending
is
on your
sometimes
community.
called,
But yeah,
you know, the mandatory affordability is sometimes called inclusionary zoning, which effectively says that you will provide affordability within a certain number of units, within a percentage of units based on a project size.
and then we can go back to any of these if anyone has any questions about that. The next one, which is similar to the previous one, is adopting an affordable housing overlay district. So rather than having inclusionary zoning or mandatory affordable requirements across your entire community, you can identify an area where it really makes sense to target the development of new affordable and workforce housing, whether it's better access to transit services and other healthcare services, or where sewer and water infrastructure already exists. So it brings down the cost of building new housing. Yeah, so this is essentially finding that area in your community, creating an overlay district, and then requiring those minimum affordable requirements for a certain size project. Next one is streamlining the development approval process. As I was mentioning, uncertainty about the approval process, how long it'll take, or whether it'll even get approved, is a restriction on new development that prevents people from wanting to build good projects here in the county. So this Housing Smart Action essentially looks at going through your development review process, updating it, streamlining where it's necessary, so that there's clarity and certainty for folks who do want to build good projects here in the county. This includes things like a pre-application meeting, a checklist to make sure that anyone who wants to build new housing has a clear understanding of what's required in that process, rather than having it be reactive by the municipality. Anything else here, Dennis?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
All righty. Next one is developing a housing sites inventory and a requests for concepts. So this one is a little more involved, but essentially independent of a housing action plan or part of the housing action plan, going through your community, identifying where there are vacant parcels or underutilized parcels, to understand where new development and new housing in the community would be best fit. And then working with the community through workshops or design charrettes or something like that to understand what type of housing would be acceptable in the community and create requests for concepts from developers. So this isn't a full-on housing development essentially, but what a concept of a new housing would look like in the community. So when they do go through the development review process, there's an understanding of this is what the appetite for the community and what the type of design that's acceptable for the community is already.
And this can take two forms. It can take the form of essentially identifying lands that the community owns, or that an entity within the community owns and is willing to essentially make it available, affordable housing. Or it can be working with a willing buyer, willing seller, or a willing seller to essentially work through this process with a willing seller that is interested in community issues and community concerns, and is willing to offer his property or her property up for a potential for a residential development or a mixed use development in that way. And we have used this process with respect to the county. The county did a look at its lands that it owns and continues to look at lands that it owns for a potential for housing development. And that resulted in a project that identifying a place on Golden Hill, and a project that has now gone through the approval process at the city for 164 units of affordable housing. And we've completed site plan approval, all our environmental quality review work, as well as a rezoning, and are now waiting for the funding applications to be completed and go through. And we're currently in the process of demolishing the existing jail, the former jail that was on the site, to make room for that project. We also have a template for a request for our qualifications that we have shared with several municipalities to date, so that they understand what's involved here, and the county doesn't have to be the lead on this. The local community can take the lead, and we'll certainly provide technical assistance to walk you through how this could work.
Thanks, Dennis. Next couple more here. The next one is adopting a building energy code. We want to make sure that the new housing that is being built is energy efficient. Utility costs in our area are extremely high and going up. So we want to make sure that we can bring down costs for new homeowners as well, or new renters as well. So New York has a template called the New York Stretch Code. So a community can essentially adopt that or create their own, but we'll give you points for that. Establishing or joining a housing rehabilitation program. So that's taking the foreclosed and otherwise derelict housing stock within a community and rehabbing it and then selling it to homeowners or renting it. This is a big lift. Some of this work is already being done kind of piecemeal throughout the county, but we are happy to provide technical support to identify and match those funds for a particular community.
And this also helps, quite frankly, with those folks that are on a fixed income and families that can't afford to make the necessary improvements so that they can stay in their house. Currently, Ulster County is currently managing a program that effectively it's an $800,000 grant from Office of Community Renewal that goes in and provides housing rehabilitation to low and moderate income families and homeowners to essentially make sure that they can meet the current codes. They can stay current in the current codes. And the county is considering a resolution this month to essentially provide additional funding to do deeper energy dives within those buildings or separate from those buildings to essentially reduce the energy costs to low and moderate income people as a part of a pilot program, so that we can understand what those energy improvements would cost and whether or not we can encourage the private sector through low interest loans with less of a community subsidy to essentially make those improvements. And that's what we're trying to do right now. And we're working with a Citizens for Local Power. There's also a training program, a job training program that's attached to it. But I will tell you that communities themselves are eligible for community development block grant funds. They're also eligible for a funding source called HOME or home funds. And many of our communities are eligible for USDA money as well with respect to some of these programs. And that's what we want you to explore, and we'll help you do that exploration.
Thanks, Dennis. Kabir has a question or his hand up, and I think this is a small enough group where we can just take questions.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
My question was regarding the previous program that you had for properties that are available to increase the housing stock. Not the building energy, before that. There was like, this one.
Yeah.
Most of the time I've noticed that most of these properties end up either going to a large developer or a non-for-profit organization. I humbly wanted to
Come here, we lost you.
Uh-oh. I'm gonna run through. I realize we're recording right now, and so I'm gonna run through the rest of them, and then Kabir, I'm gonna come back to you, and hopefully we can hear you.
Yeah, if you could put that in a chat, a brief note in the chat, we'll come back to it on that basis.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. And so the last one is create innovative housing solutions. So this is kind of a catch-all for any strategy that a community has been thinking about or is currently working on to preserve and develop workforce and affordable housing in their community. Things like developing a community land trust to create affordable housing in perpetuity over the long term. Getting very creative and innovative with how to site and zone for things like tiny homes and other types of supportive housing for the unhoused population. Town of Woodstock is working on a great program called Home Shares right now, which essentially matches homeowners that have extra rooms with folks who are looking for housing as kind of a work exchange matching program. And so things like that, we want to give you points for all of those creative ideas. So that's all of the programs or actions that we have right now. There might be future actions that we include based on what we're hearing from the community, what we're thinking about, what's working, what's not working, but those are kind of the foundational set of 12 actions right there. Here's kind of the certification levels and the amount of points that are required for each of them. This is a fun way of gamifying it, but at the end of the day, we really want to just support you in doing good housing policy. All this information is on the website, which I'm going to show you really quickly right here. We're providing all of this information to you now, but you're welcome to go jump on our website, which is, can everyone see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Which is right here. If you just type Housing Smart Communities Initiative on the internet, it'll pop up. You can also go to the Ulster County Planning Department website. But this is the website. We've got a lot of information about what the program is, the certification process, frequently asked questions about affordable housing, which communities are participating in them, some housing resources, other things we're working on, some key stats about housing to communicate to the general public. Let's see. Yeah, for anyone who does want to get involved, here's the kind of the steps. Here's that model resolution to join the program. And then all the kind of individual steps to walk you through how to join. Here's a lot more detail on all of the different housing smart actions that we were just talking about. So essentially what the action is, what are the minimum criteria to get points for it for the program, and then also examples, templates, research studies on these different actions. And then we've also got an area for each community that does join to submit all the information about who your coordinator is going to be, who's on your housing task force, have you passed the resolution, uploading it, and then for each of the actions, once you've completed them, submitting information so that you can get certified for that action. We'll probably include other things here in the future, but just wanted to share that with you. And that is it. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can have a conversation.